Today's headline is Billy the Kid. The subheadline says, the most famous of the Badmen of the West. This article was written by Frank J. Arkins. A howling mob of fortune hunters crowded into Silver City, New Mexico in the 70s. The uncovering of mineral wealth was beset with great danger. The Apaches were on the warpath. It was hazardous to travel in the country without an escort, but the magnet of wealth in the mines drew men to the scene notwithstanding. In the citizenship of the community, there were rough men, for the early days were typical of those of other mining camps isolated in the mountains and distant from civilization. In that community, there lived a boy of 17 years of age, respected and loved by all. He was a favorite among the young men and considered a model youth by the old. He was gentle as a child. His face was delicately molded, his skin as fair as a girl's, his hands small and fingers tapering. Lithe, graceful, self-reliant, he gave every promise of an honorable career. This boy, William H. Bonney, was employed in a local store and was considered a most accommodating clerk. The gruff community was convulsed with horror and dumbfounded with astonishment one afternoon when the news spread like wildfire that Bonney had hacked a man to death with a butcher knife and was fleeing for his life on the back of a stolen horse. The murder was particularly atrocious. It was the result of an altercation in which young Bonney was crossed. Prior to this, the boy had never been questioned. In an instant, he was transformed into a demon. Within a few minutes, he had added theft to murder, and in seeking a place of safety, left behind him a trail as broad as though he were following a macadam road. At the point of a revolver, he compelled strangers to exchange horses with him, seized the best mounts at the various ranches along his way, and spread consternation wherever he went. He followed the Mimbres River towards Deming, pursued by a posse from Silver City. Closely pressed, he escaped eastward over the Oregon Mountains when it was thought he had headed for Mexico. The start of a bad man's trail. A western town was never more surprised. The majority of the people still defended him. There was some reason, his friends declared, for his strange act. But as news came of the way he was striking terror in the valley of the Pecos, where the roughest men in the Southwest lived, the mind of the public was changed. From that time on, his murderous exploits filled the hearts of men with fear. The boy's name in Western history became forever after Billy the Kid. His name of Bonney is all but forgotten. As the Kid, he stands as one of the great historical figures of the cow country, one of the worst youth that ever lived, prince of bad men, the youngest bad man of all. His appearance among the prospectors and amid the mining camps of the Oregon Mountains was electrical. Here he conceived the idea that to evade arrest, he must fight his way to the front single-handed. He boldly traded horses, obtained credit, bought supplies, because he could shoot straight with a revolver and had threatened the lives of a number of men. Then with all dispatch, he pushed on to the valley of the Pecos. This was the scene of the boy's exploits in the taking of human life. The Pecos Valley was filled with men who had been driven out of Texas by the Rangers, and Billy the Kid's association with these men developed his mania for shedding blood. In his first altercation, he realized that it was his life or the other man's. The fact that he was quick with a gun made him feared. He became embittered against one of the stockmen immediately upon his arrival in the valley. "I'll make this valley too odd for him and dangerous to his punchers," said the boy. At once he commenced to use this man's cowboys as targets to practice on. He began a campaign that drew upon him the enmity of everybody. The murder of these innocent men, purely to gratify a spite against their employer, made him a leader among the bands of armed thugs of the region. He had at a bound become a celebrity, and every group of bad men wanted to claim him. But the Kid would have none of that. By degrees, he gathered a band of his own. How many men did he kill? The Kid killed more men, wantonly, and for sheer love of murder, than any other man of whom there is a record in the West. It will never be known just how many he assassinated. He was a butcher who took delight in slaying the defenseless. He knew no pangs of conscience. He had not one single redeeming trait. He would murder a friend as quickly as an enemy. He thought nothing of appearing before a cook in charge of a chuck wagon on a lonely desert range, ask for something to eat, compliment the man upon the quality of the food he had prepared with apparent gratitude. He would ask him, as if the idea had suddenly popped into his head, whether he was an officer or had been. Then, as though in doubt, he would shoot him in his tracks. This is no exaggeration. A man whom he left for dead and who survived long enough to tell the story, was authority for the statement, shortly after his arrival on the Pecos River. The boy was a terror before whom everybody fled. He rode the fastest horses. He helped himself to the best there was in every community he visited, wiggled out of any number of tight places, and shot his way to freedom a dozen times. Shortly after his arrival in the valley, he was persuaded, because of his reputation as a bad man, to assist in the arrest of free men charged with murder. They were captured without the firing of a shot, placed on horses, ironed, and started jailward. To the deputy sheriff, who with him followed the prisoners across a long, dusty sand plain, he turned suddenly and said, "Let's kill those fellows. Why? They haven't done anything to us. They're guilty anyway, and we'll just save the county expense. No, Billy, they haven't given us a chance to shoot at them. They've not tried to escape." The deputy tried to argue with him, for he could see the light of murder dancing in the fellow's eyes. The kid rode forward, compelling the officer to do likewise, and according to the story told, shot all free men. The deputy spurred his pony, the kid after him. They exchanged shots, and the officer escaped with a few wounds. From that time on, it was dangerous for the kid to enter a community. He raided north through Lincoln County, which was larger than many eastern states. There was not a line of railway or telegraph in it, and no telephones. It was easy to get away. At that time, there was rivalry between the different outfits. The country was filled with bad men, and they were about evenly divided among the cowmen. Cattle stealing was a common thing. The kid became involved in a number of rows, and he took sides. His reputation as a killer grew. Undoubtedly, a number of these men were killed as a result of trouble among themselves, and the killing laid to the door of the kid. It was easy. He couldn't deny it. No one would have believed him if he had. Besides, the more murders credited to him, the greater the fear in which he would be held. Thus it was that it finally became impossible to get anyone to accept the position of sheriff of Lincoln County, for it was only a question of time when he would run across the youthful demon. The kid knew that he had terrorized the country. He knew that the instant he let down his guard, he would be killed. His safety lay in continuing. The turn of the tide. Then one day, even those hard characters who professed to be his friends were amazed by the report that for some trivial incident he had killed a member of his own band. The outlaws were now as anxious to end his career as were the law-abiding people of the village. His friends commenced to murmur. The kid was now reported in a dozen places at the same time, and these stories he turned to his advantage by appearing at irregular, though frequent, intervals in widely separated cow camps for more than 150 miles north and south of the Pecos River. Pat Garrett, a lanky Alabaman who had helped organize the Texas Rangers and had assisted in driving the Badman out of Texas to the first water west of the Staked Plains, was invited by the cattlemen to locate in New Mexico. They wanted him to restore order. The only way that could be done was either to arrest or to kill the kid. Garrett's record in Texas as a manhunter and a badman tamer was known all over the Southwest. In addition to being quick with a gun, he was absolutely without fear. He was elected without opposition and took hold with an iron hand. He was an organizer, and men flocked to his standard. They felt instinctively that at last a man had arrived who could cope with the situation. The capture of the kid. In November 1880, Garrett came upon the kid suddenly and captured him with several others after killing one man. Word had reached Garrett that the kid and his gang of free were located in an old house a short distance from Sumner. "We had better make plans to get him," said one of the deputies. "The plan is to get there before he gets away. I'll tell you what to do on the way." The way led down a sage-covered draw with several bends made by sand dunes around which the road curved for a distance of about 5 miles. Before he reached the last bend, he pulled up his horse and waited for his deputies to come up to him, and then, in the even voice for which he was noted, said, "I am going to ride ahead. All attention will be centered on me. That will give you a chance to surround the house. I'm going to take my time and walk my horse. They may get me, but if they do, I want you to make certain that you get him." The deputies withdrew to right and left, advancing under cover of the sandhills in an ever-widening circle until they had surrounded the house. Then Garrett rode forward. From his position, he could see his deputies, who had dismounted, advancing cautiously through the sagebrush. He permitted his horse to walk slowly, as though utterly unconscious of the presence of the gang. At the door, he called loudly. Someone appeared at the window, and firing a shot at the sheriff, dodged back. It was done in an instant, but in that fraction of a second, the man who had fired dropped dead in his tracks. Garrett had dismounted, and with his deputies, poured a fusillade of bullets. Someone appeared at the window, and firing a shot at the sheriff, dodged back. It was done in an instant, but in that fraction of a second, the man who had fired dropped dead in his tracks. Garrett had dismounted, and with his deputies, poured a fusillade of bullets through the sides of the thinly boarded shack. A white handkerchief at the window indicated the surrender of Billy the Kid and his gang. "You give me a 6-gun, Pat." When Garrett reached the railroad with his prisoner, he was menaced by a crowd that sought to lynch the kid. "It looks as though they're going to get me, Pat," the kid remarked. It was an ugly crowd, bent on dealing to the boy the fate he was certain to meet sooner or later. "Not if I can help it, Billy. You're under my care, and I intend to protect you. You give me a 6-gun, Pat, and stand aside a few moments, and I'll clean out the whole crowd. You'll see them stampede the minute you give me a gun. You could help, if you played square." "I'd have to, old man. I'm in the tightest place I ever was in my life. They'll get us both if you try it alone. They may get me anyway, but you're up against it if you try to defend me alone." "I'll trust you once, Billy, but understand, no foolishness. I'll drop you if you try it." The crowd grew more menacing. The demand for the life of the kid became more insistent. "Listen," shouted the tall sheriff during a slight lull. "The man is my prisoner. You told me to arrest him. I have. He must have a fair trial. I know he's guilty, but it's for a jury to pronounce him so. You cannot take him while I have a breath of life left, or while Billy the Kid has either." Saying which, he passed a revolver to the boy, who had struck terror into the Pecos Valley. "You must get the two of us now." Back to back, the sheriff of Lincoln County and the most noted murderer in the Southwest stood. "Now, Billy," cautioned Garrett, "don't shoot unless I tell you to. Remember that without me, your life is not worth 2 bits today." It was impossible to tell what was working in the mind concealed behind the childish face of the kid. It was equally as impossible to read the thoughts of the determined sheriff who waited with apparent unconcern. The crowd knew and feared the kid. With only Garrett to fight, the members might have risked it. With a revolver in the kid's hand, they hesitated. Garrett was quick to see the advantage he had gained. "Now you will all move quietly away," he announced decisively. Sullenly, the crowd obeyed. Held at bay, Garrett placed the kid aboard the train, which arrived a few moments later. The keeper and the makings. The kid was tried in another county. He had no friends and no defense. There were plenty of witnesses against him now that he was a prisoner. He was defended by an attorney who made a brave fight, but he was sentenced to be hanged at Lincoln in July 1881. He was brought back and confined in a jail built after the manner of Mexican houses, of adobe brick, with thick walls around a court or patio. The day before he was to be hanged, 6 horses stood in the street, lines thrown over their heads, all that is necessary to make a cow pony remain in one place. The kid called from the gallery to the warden. "Hi there, Belle. I'm going to swing tomorrow. Give me the makings, will you?" "Seguro, Miguel," shouted the warden, laughing. Translated into English, the answer meant, "Sure, Mike." The kid stepped to the stairs. His hands were manacled in such manner that he had little use of them. The warden reached in his vest pocket for the cigarette paper, which he placed in his left hand, and with his right felt in his hip pocket for a sack of tobacco. Like a flash, the kid raised his manacled hands and struck Bell square in the temple. The warden staggered. As he did so, the kid jerked Bell's revolver from its holster and dealt the jailer a blow on the head that crushed his skull. "Unfasten the jewelry, and we'll both get away." He shouted these words to another prisoner standing inside his cell. The kid had been allowed the freedom of the galleries. He passed the keys taken from the prostrate warden to the man in the cell and unlocked his handcuffs. Then, leveling the warden's revolver at the prisoner, he hissed, "Give me back the keys." It was the work of but a moment to reach the barred gate that led into the street where the horses stood. A glance, and he took it all in. From where he stood, he could see the form of the warden. Leveling his revolver, he fired a shot that ended his life, and then shot the man who blocked the door. Once outside, he started a fusillade of bullets up and down the street to keep everybody in the houses. In another instant, he was on the best horse and had stampeded the others so the pursuit would be delayed. In a few moments, he was out of sight. Garrett was about 20 miles away at the time, after some rustlers. Word was sent to him, and he returned post-haste, heard the story from excited lips and stopped only long enough to saddle a fresh horse. Accompanied by a few friends, he took the kid's trail. At the end of 48 hours of flight, when tired out, Billy the Kid stopped at the house of a man named Maxwell near Sumner. Retiring, he figured doubtless that Garrett would have to pause for rest also. It was early the second morning, probably about 3 a.m., when the silent sheriff saw in front of him the cabin in which the kid slept. He and his men dismounted and approached the house. Garrett reached the porch with his deputies and quietly stepped into Maxwell's room. There are several accounts of what took place. One is to the effect that Garrett left his deputies stationed outside beyond the house. He was whispering to Maxwell when the kid, who was a light sleeper, awoke and tiptoeing across the porch, entered, revolver in hand, and asked, "Who is that who just came? Where is he?" From his position, Garrett could see him distinctly, and had the kid been looking, he might have distinguished the form of the sheriff standing by the bedside of Maxwell. The kid had his revolver in hand, prepared to use it. Garrett knew that and fired the single shot that killed the kid. This story came from the great state of Utah, being reported in the Gunnison Gazette of February 28, 1913. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.